Hello and welcome into episode 34 of Preps to Pros. I'm Cooper Petagna alongside Andrew Ivins. We got a great show for you today. Week 11 college football, the SEC West now decided Georgia and LSU in the SEC championship. We'll also get to the juice with Andrew Ivins, freshman impact, winners and losers as we do every week. The 2024 arms race with our update coming out on Wednesday in 2024. And then we'll get to the 2-minute drill as well. Talk a little bit about Arizona football, Jedd Fisch, the job that he has done there. But Drew, a busy weekend. We talked about it last week, silly season, a lot on this show. Flips galore. We kind of see that even leading up to the show already. Some prominent decommitments, but a big week, especially in the SEC last week. And Drew, on this show, we talked about Ole Miss having an opportunity to capitalize on the recruiting trail. A big visitor coming in town this past weekend as they hosted Alabama. That is from the state of Florida, running back Chris Johnson, and a guy they would like to have in the boat to add to Quinshon Judkins and Zach Evans as well.
Yeah, one of the nation's fastest recruits, and Christopher Johnson. I was at his game on Friday night. As soon as that thing went final, he was scrambling to get to the airport to fly out to Oxford to spend a few days there with the Rebels. Just talking with some people familiar with the recruitment over the past 12 hours or so. It sounds like Ole Miss is in a good spot. And just before we came on this show, I fired in a crystal ball forecast for Lane Kiffin and the Rebels. You know, you talk to Chris Johnson about Ole Miss, the first thing he says is, hey, they lead the SEC in rushing yards. And then he brings up Quinshon Judkins. He brings up Zach Evans. So he knows he can go there, run the football, and I think Ole Miss is in the driver's seat here with, 6-7 weeks to go before signing day. Miami, Penn State, I think a bunch of other schools will come calling, but right now I like Ole Miss for Chris Johnson, and he is a dynamic playmaker. In that Friday night game, he caught a little screen Cooper, spun out of a tackle, and then as soon as he got to the perimeter, I was standing there talking to someone. I'm like, oh, he's gone. That guy's got the straight line speed, 10.4 in the 100-meter dash, also state champ in the 200-meter dash. So Lane Kiffin could have a new toy coming soon to Oxford.
That's another 3-star running back that I can guarantee you, Andrew and I will make sure we pour over the film before we put a final grade on him. But Drew, let's stay in the Sunshine State. We're going to go to Billy Napier and the Florida Gators, who right now look like they're in a position to close really strong in the 2023 cycle. But a big name on campus this past weekend, that is top 247 offensive lineman Lucas Simmons, originally from Sweden. And Drew, we've talked a lot about Lucas Simmons on this show, one of those guys that possesses probably one of the higher upsides of all the offensive linemen in the country. It seems like the Gators are trying to make a push here late. Where do they stand right now?
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting one. And I think there's going to be a little back and forth before signing day. And that's just kind of the reality with these big blue chippers. Lucas Simmons, Cooper, we talked about him, 2-3 weeks ago after he faced off with Damon Wilson, had an excellent performance in that game. I mean, this is a guy that's a prototypical left tackle. And I think a lot of people forget when he made his decision back in June, Florida was one of the finalists, and I think they might have been, right there behind Florida State. The Gators were giving Lucas plenty to think about. He's there at Clearwater Academy International, not that far. Gainesville's not that far away. Obviously, Tallahassee's right around the corner as well. So, Florida, they're big on the offensive line. We know they want to run the football. And they got two assistants there helping with that unit. So I think Lucas Simmons knows he can go there and he could get coached and he could get developed. And I also am just wondering, and this is speculating a little bit, maybe Lucas is wondering, what happens with Alex Atkins, the offensive line coach at Florida State. FSU's having a great year up front in the trenches. Alex Atkins, Cooper, we've mentioned him as a potential guy that could get looks somewhere else. Charlotte, the 49ers, that's a group of 5 opening, or maybe someone wants him to be their full-time offensive coordinator. So interesting to see. Still think we're going to have some more twists and turns with Lucas Simmons, and he's a guy we're super high on, like we always said. Someone we think could be a multi-year starter at that left tackle spot, and I think Florida's looking for one of those.
Let's stick in Gainesville, Drew. Another guy they're chipping away on. That is top 247 running back Mark Fletcher from American Heritage High School in Plantation, and a guy that's currently committed to Ryan Day in the Buckeyes. But it seems like Mark Fletcher, whether it's Miami, Florida, a lot of teams pulling on him right now. What's the latest with him?
He is shopping around, and Miami was the team he kept getting linked to. Last time I saw Mark Fletcher, he actually brought up Florida. I didn't know he was going to visit. The next thing you know, Saturday he's in Gainesville. Blake Alderman with Swamp 247. He says he's telling me the Gators think they've made a move. I'm hoping to make it out to Mark Fletcher's playoff game tonight, just kind of get a gauge on where he's at. But I think you got to definitely watch Florida here. Billy Napier, ever since he's arrived in Gainesville, he has shown he wants to run the football, and he's going to play a variety of different running backs, right? The younger Etienne, he had an 85-yard touchdown run over the weekend. Naquan Wright got in there. Montrell Johnson, the transfer from Louisiana. So they're just going to ride the hot hand and rotate by committee. And I think if you're Mark Fletcher, he pieces in nicely into that smash mouth brand of football they want to play. So would not be surprised maybe if he took an official visit to Florida. We'll see. Nothing concrete there just yet. But I think if you're Ohio State, you do need to be a little bit concerned that Mark Fletcher was in the swamp on Saturday for really a total team dominating performance from the Gators.
Billy Napier in the Gators up to number 8 in the 24/7 Sports composite team rankings are surging right now. We're going to talk a little bit about them later on in the show. But, Drew, let's go to the Big Ten and a team that certainly could use a boost. That is Michigan State and Mel Tucker. They go down to St. Thomas Aquinas, pluck themselves a linebacker and 3-star linebacker, Jayvon Brown, and Drew, a guy that you really like.
He is, and he's someone that first came onto the scene as a running back there at University School, ended up at Deerfield Beach. Now he's playing his senior season at St. Thomas Aquinas, and it's taken him a while to get adjusted to that playbook, learn the system, but I think he's come on really strong here as a senior, and I'm always going to bet on a kid out of STA. We talked a few weeks ago about Mason Taylor and what he's done for LSU. Zion Turner, true freshman quarterback, just led UConn to bowl eligibility. So normally these kids out of STA are ready to make an impact early, and I think Jayvon Brown is a guy that can be a second-level defender that moves around well. I actually think the Big Ten Conference is kind of the perfect fit for him. And I was wondering, hey, who is going to get involved and give Brown the green light to commit? And it's Michigan State. He was just up there in East Lansing on a visit. LSU was kicking the tires, Florida was kicking the tires, but I think this is a good get for them. I think he's a guy that you can play in the middle, a guy that can hawk people down, and he should do good things for the Spartans over the next few years.
He'll pair nicely with top 247 linebacker Jordan Hall from IMG Academy, who the Spartans picked up earlier in the cycle. But Drew, last week, Thursday night, we were already in bed. We woke up Friday morning and our phones were buzzing. That is because Jaden Rashada flipped his commitment from Miami to the Florida Gators. If you don't know, Jaden Rashada is one of the best quarterbacks in the country, the number 6 quarterback in the country per 24/7 Sports, the number 17 ranked player overall, and a guy that is right there on the cusp of 5-star status out there in Pittsburgh, California. And Drew, a guy that's been well documented in his recruitment. This one kind of went back and forth earlier in the summer. A lot of people thought it was going to be Billy Napier and the Florida Gators. From the get-go, he ends up going with Miami. Miami has struggled this season offensively. Now, late in November, when this stuff seems to occur, he flips his commitment to Florida. Drew, this is a big get. We talked a lot about it on Oyster Boys Radio on Friday, but your general impressions of Jaden Rashada flipping his commitment from the Canes to the Gators?
I just think Florida and Billy Napier and that offensive staff have done an excellent job of flipping the script with that quarterback room. The big question has been what happens in Gainesville post Anthony Richardson, and there's no real answer. They brought Jack Miller in, the transfer from Ohio State. He's been dinged up a little bit. A few other arms, Max Brown, the Kitna kid, they're all involved there. But there is really no quarterback of the future, and I think Jaden Rashada can be that guy for the Gators. And what I also love about this is they got another top 247 quarterback committed in Marcus Stokes, who seems to be all in on UF and going there and competing. So, Billy Napier, it hasn't taken long for him to just change the dynamic of that room. And I think it sets up perfectly. If Anthony Richardson stays for another year, then Stokes and Rashada battle it out behind him. Maybe one of those guys could play as a freshman. We've seen so many freshman quarterbacks play this year. Maybe that's not ideal. But I commend Billy Napier for really turning around the trajectory of that quarterback room. And I think that's the story here. Yeah,
he's done an excellent job, I would say, peppering the Southeast, especially the state of Florida. But to be able to go out and get one of the best arms in the country from the state of California, I think that is Billy Napier putting the rest of the country on notice. And Drew, we talked about the quarterback room, the state of the quarterback room. If Anthony Richardson does declare to take his talents to Sunday after this season, Jack Miller, the transfer that you have from Ohio State, I think Florida's going to need another quarterback to kind of bridge that gap between Jaden Rashada and Marcus Stokes as well. So we'll see what happens there. So obviously a lot of positive news for Florida. Drew, flip the script here. You look at Miami, certainly a team that had a lot of momentum throughout this cycle, and they still do. Still a team firmly within the top 10, number 9 in the rankings right now. But you feel as though they're maybe losing a little bit of steam, and this one kind of takes the air out of what they've been doing. Very high on Jaden Rashada, but they had 2 quarterbacks in this cycle, and another guy that they're high on is Emory Williams. Your vantage point of how you see this kind of playing out for Miami the rest of the way, and what does Jaden Rashada's decommitment mean for them?
I think Miami, they're fine with Emory Williams just being the one quarterback. And, there was a time, I think, when most of the folks in Coral Gables, most of the staff members just wanted Emory. And then Jaden Rashada became a possibility unexpectedly, and they got that done. They got him in the boat. So I don't think there's much panic right now. They just played Georgia Tech over the weekend. Jacory Brown, true freshman quarterback. He had a great performance. Hurricanes pick up a win. We'll get into Brown here a little bit later. So I don't think they're going to go and chase a second high school arm. The big question for them, just like at Florida, what's going on with Anthony Richardson? Miami, what's going to happen with Tyler Van Dyke? Remember, this is a guy that was getting mocked into a ton of first rounds in those mock drafts. He gets dinged up, not playing right now. Does he transfer out somewhere else? Does he come back for another year? I think that all depends on what happens from the offensive coordinator perspective there. Josh Gaddis is a guy right now for Mario Cristobal. Will he be the man calling plays there in 2023? So interesting to see what happens. We know Mario Cristobal loves Dante Moore. That's a name that's been tossed out there. So we'll see. But I think they're just going to stick with this one, turn the page to 2024, and then maybe get a guy out of the transfer portal depending on what happens with TBD.
You see the graphic right there that producer Chris has on the screen, and you might be asking, why is that so important right now? Well, it's that time of the year, and we're going to take you through it right now. But a couple of names, Drew, that I think we're going to keep an eye on. Dante Moore has certainly been well documented, the number 2 player in the cycle in 2023. Michigan State, Mel Tucker making a push for him. When this time of year, you're looking at some of these players who have even been committed for quite some time, but you look at the season in parallel. To me, I think what you can see there is you start to read between the lines, and some of these guys start to take a step back, re-examine, hey, are these the best fits for me? And a couple names that kind of stand out, Drew: Jackson Arnold, Avery Johnson, Austin Novosad. We'll talk about him in a second. TCU making a push for him. But one that stands out, Drew, Kenny Minchey, before we came on the show, just decommitted, top 247 quarterback from Tennessee, committed to Pittsburgh, just decommitted from Pittsburgh. All signs are pointing to Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame. We've talked a lot about Notre Dame's search for a quarterback this cycle, so it looks like it's trending in that direction. But Drew, it's like I said, I think especially if you're a program that's locked into one of the top arms in the country, as I keep saying, you got to batten down the hatches. You got to make sure that your house is in order when it comes to this, because there's certainly the sharks circling right now.
Yeah, to make sure you're paying your bills, right? NIL era, all that stuff, all your dots, the checks are going to go through and all that. You do. And that's the most important position out there. And I think it's only going to get a little bit more crazy once we have these FBS openings, once these Power 5 openings are filled with coaches, and once we see some of these offensive coordinators move around. We haven't seen much of any real coaching movement as of late. Yeah, sure, some schools have dismissed position coaches and OCs, but that whole scramble hasn't happened. And we got to get through the next 2 weeks. And then after Thanksgiving, I think there's going to be even more movement. I mean, some of these kids, we've seen it in the past. You think you're going to play for one individual. Next thing you know, that individual ends up somewhere else. Sam Howell a few years ago, he's committed to Florida State and Walt Bell. Walt Bell ends up leaving to be the head coach at UMass. And then Sam Howell flips over to Mack Brown in North Carolina. So we still haven't seen those yet, but there's still been plenty of quarterback movement. Jaden Rashada, Kenny Minchey, like you said, and there's a few more that could be on the move as well.
Drew, there's one more because you keep mentioning it. I want you to hit on this a little bit off script, but Malachi Singleton, obviously there's been some interest, the Arkansas commit out of the state of Georgia. Been some interest between him and Gus Malzahn at Central Florida. What's the latest on that one?
Yeah, UCF, man, that big win over the weekend down there, right in your neck of the woods, Cooper, in New Orleans. I mean, UCF is looking great right now, and they have potential to be one of the top teams of all Group of Five. I think currently slated to be in the American, to be in position to play for an American Conference title. So, he's visited twice unofficially over the past month. He's been injured this season, but he fits what Gus wants to do. He can run the football just like John Rice Plumlee. He can spray it around. This is a guy that's produced in the Peach State's highest classification. So that's one I do think we need to keep an eye on, especially given where UCF is right now, and given the fact that Gus wants these run-first quarterbacks.
For sure, I really like the fit there. And Drew, before we wrap it up, Kenny Minchey, like I said, trending to Notre Dame right now, top 247 quarterback. A couple crystal balls rolling in. Tom Loy, Notre Dame insider, and our director of recruiting, Steve Whoopfong, as well. They've jumped in on that. But Kenny Minchey, a guy been a little banged up this season, dealing with a shoulder injury, came back in the playoffs, led his team to a first-round victory, but something that's been bothering him. But before he got hurt, Drew, 73% completion rate, 11 touchdowns, 1 interception. I think this is a guy that turned a lot of heads over the summer with his performance at the Elite 11 finals, and a guy that kind of drew cops to me, very similar to a guy like Dante Moore. You look at the build a little bit, very efficient passer, plays within himself, really doesn't overextend. And, we've talked a lot about the big picture for Notre Dame. What does this mean for the Irish? And this is not just a bridge guy for Notre Dame. This is a very cerebral player that I think fits what they want to do. And if you're Marcus Freeman, listen, you're tied with Georgia for number one in the country and top 247 commitment. So the wave of talent that you got coming in, you want to make sure that you give those guys every chance to be successful, especially on the perimeter. And they're doing that with a guy like Kenny Minchey. And Kenny Minchey is not just a Band-Aid or a bridge before CJ Carr gets there. He can play. So I really like this gift from Marcus Freeman, Tommy Rees. I have been harsh on them in terms of their pursuit in 2023 for a quarterback. And listen, to be able to pull this off, if they do in fact get Kenny Minchey in the boat, Drew, I like this one a lot.
Yeah, and he can also run the football. I mean, I said Malachi's run first. I mean, he's not a run first, but him and Kenny Minchey are very similar. They can get outside the pocket. They got those bigger frames. They can take some hits. So, no, I like that. One other one, Cooper, we kind of teased it a little bit, but Austin Novosad, the quarterback committed to Baylor. He's been committed to Dave Aranda and the Baylor Bears throughout the process. Well, Friday night playoff game, Garrett Riley, the offensive coordinator for TCU, he was in the stands, and I think that's somewhat notable. TCU's having a dream Cinderella type season. I mean, they're in the college football playoff conversation. Baylor, on the other hand, is 6-4 right now. They're hoping to make the Texas Bowl. So Novosad hasn't wavered. Texas A&M went after him. Ohio State went after him. Notre Dame went after him. He has stuck with the Bears, but we're getting into that 11th hour. We're getting closer to the buzzer right now, and you got one of the hottest teams in all of college football sniffing around in TCU. I think that's one to certainly monitor, and really it was a bad weekend for Baylor. They also had DJ Lagway, a 2024 quarterback. He was in Waco for their game against Kansas State. Didn't even see them score a touchdown, so we'll get into that a little bit later, but Novosad, another one to keep an eye on.
5 weeks until National Signing Day. It's going to be a busy one, especially with the quarterbacks. Make sure you keep it locked there and keep it locked to 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. A lot going on right now. The Whitfong Whip Around, the recruiting show coming on twice a week. Those guys doing a great job. And, of course, the Oyster Boys will be here Monday and Wednesday, new time, 5 o'clock Eastern time. So make sure you join us. But, Drew, one of our favorite segments, and a guy that we are getting pretty used to talking about over the last couple of weeks, highlighting true freshman impact in Week 11. I don't think there's anybody else you can start with than Harold Perkins. I mean, what a game he had against Arkansas. 8 tackles, 4 sacks, 4 tackles for loss, 2 forced fumbles, and LSU needed every bit of it in a really frigid day there in Arkansas. 13-10 win for them. They clinched the SEC West with an Ole Miss loss. Drew, Harold Perkins, to me, is a video game type of player. It's one of those guys who's a creative player. You crank everything up to 99, and you just watch him go do what he does. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. We said this last week after the Alabama game. So for him to consecutively have games like this, I said it earlier today, they don't win those 2 games without his performance. He's making a case for arguably one of the best players in all of college football, one of the best defensive players as well. Dynamic, versatile, you can use him anywhere on the field. And right now, nobody has an answer for him.
I'll say this, Coop. I love the fact that we had him number 5 overall in the class of 2022 and the nation's number 1 ranked linebacker, because it continues to look like this guy is a 3-and-done right to the NFL. And Coop, you'd even mentioned that stat line. Didn't Brian Kelly say Harold had like the flu or something like that? He wasn't 100%. I can only imagine running around in what was essentially frigid temperatures. What also stands out to me about Harold Perkins and Gabe Brooks, our colleague there on the Rankings Council, he had a great story just about who Harold Perkins was, how he came up, and I thought that was a great read. So if you haven't seen that on 247sports.com, I highly encourage it. Talks about the 2-way snaps Harold Perkins had his senior season. And then Gabe also brought up who could maybe be the next Harold Perkins in terms of a guy in the class of 2023. And he tossed out Anthony Hill, who's a guy we've talked about on this show in the past, the 5-star linebacker that recently decommitted from Texas A&M and is trending towards Texas. But no, Harold Perkins is must-watch TV right now, I think. And I never saw that. I thought it would be a year or 2 before we got that out of him.
I said he was from Texas last show. The people in New Orleans wanted me to correct that. Me as a New Orleans boy should know that. He is originally from New Orleans, and obviously a lot of proud people down here in the state of Louisiana. So I had to get that right. Drew, let's go to Miami. Another guy you were knocking on, and I don't know if we were just lucky or what, but you brought up Jacory Brown and said, hey, listen, I think this guy, it's time to get him some more snaps. And he answered 14 of 19 this week against Georgia Tech, 73% completion rate, 136 yards, 3 touchdowns. Also got it done on the ground, too, 19 rushes, 87 yards. Got to be excited here if you're Miami. You've kind of been looking for this all year.
Yeah, I'm a big Jacory supporter. We said it last week on Preps to Pros. Miami needs to roll with him. And I think the biggest thing was put him in position to succeed. And we saw Josh Gaddis and Mario Cristobal do that. This is a guy that, again, ran for over 4,000 yards at the varsity level in the state of Georgia. He's an elite athlete. And he gets, he might not be the most polished of passers, but I'll tell you this, from the first time I saw him throw in person was back during COVID in 2020. Everyone's wearing masks. It was a camp up in Jacksonville. He took a major step in a year, and then the year after that, he took another major step, and I think he's already progressed since he's arrived at Miami. So, I think so many people focus on the things that he can't do well, but what about the things that he can do and can potentially do? And I think Jacory Brown has a really bright future. I'll admit this, Cooper, I did not have on the bingo card Jacory Brown for Zach Pyron, 2 freshman quarterbacks this season. I mean, really, we're at the point of football where you're only as good as your number 2 or your number 3. So wild to think about, but no, excellent performance from him. And there were some other freshmen for Miami that stood out as well. Jaleel Skinner, the top 247 tight end that Miami flipped from Alabama during the early signing period. He caught a touchdown pass. Wesley Besainth, true freshman linebacker, top 247 kid. He got the start for the Hurricanes in that second level of the defense. So Mario's playing the youth. I mean, they know they're not going to win an ACC title. If you're a Hurricanes fan, encouraging to see what all those guys did.
You think about how rocky this year has been for Mario Cristobal in Miami. It seems like they're top of the headlines every week. If they can find a way to get to the postseason here, win one of the next 2, win the bowl game, I think that's going to be enough positive momentum for Mario Cristobal to sell to the program, and obviously playing a lot of young guys right now, Drew, as you mentioned. But let's go to the Big Ten, and a guy that has certainly wasted no time making impressions. That is 4-star linebacker Abdul Carter from the state of Pennsylvania. He has been an early asset for James Franklin and company, made his presence known once again this weekend against Maryland. 7 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, a sack, a forced fumble, and a pass deflection. Drew, this dude, I mean, along with Harold Perkins, I don't know where these guys are coming from.
I don't know either, too. I mean, he's wearing 11. You see it right there. You're like, oh, is that Micah Parson highlight? We got producer Chris grabbed the wrong one. No, that's Abdul Carter. And when I was at the Penn State Auburn game, back in September, I didn't really know, I was like, who is this guy? And then you start reading about him and you see the profile. But he's just this new age guy that you can kind of move around as a chess piece. And I think more defensive coordinators are realizing that. Obviously, Harold Perkins, Matt House, what they're doing there in Baton Rouge is impressive. And then Manny Diaz, he might have failed as the head coach at Miami, but he knows a thing or two about creating havoc on defense, moving guys around. And we've seen him do that with Abdul Carter. Sometimes Abdul drops back in coverage. Other times he's rushing the quarterback, but he too is not must-watch TV. But if you're watching the game, put your eyes on number 11, and it's exciting.
Last one on this list, drum roll, please. What a surprise. That is Ole Miss running back Quinshon Judkins. Drew, he's been an absolute terror. Tops in the country, top 10 in the country, I think, in rushing yards, 25 rushes, 130.
Used to adapt his playbook to his personnel. I mean, Judkins, who would have thought that they'd be running the football like they are, but they know what they got in Quinshon Judkins.
Yeah, dude's been a bull, and you got Zach Evans, former 5-star in the backfield. It's been Judkins all year who's been the guy. Drew, a couple other standout performances, Texas A&M, LT Overton, a guy that reclassified, but 9 tackles, 1 tackle for a loss, will stay in the SEC. Trevor Etienne, another guy that we liked, 8 touches, 100 yards, a touchdown. One of those came on an 85-yard run. And then Antonio Williams, Drew, 10 receptions, 83 yards, and a touchdown. Really like that kid, a late riser for us in the process. But you look at some of these kids, man, and to me, what stands out, we got to see a couple of these guys in San Antonio or Orlando in the Under Armour Bowl, and that really kind of helps clarify, and it's starting to get that time of the year again. I feel like I keep saying that, but that really helps in the evaluation process. Any of those guys stand out to you this weekend?
Well, for sure, one more, a guy that you should have had on there, I put on the pre-production sheet, Wade Woodaz, freshman linebacker for Clemson. This is a kid that was, you mentioned late bloomers, former baseball player, looked like he was going to play D1 baseball. Then he's at Jesuit. They kind of move him around. He settles in at safety. And Clemson actually got him into the game at linebacker at Louisville after Trenton Simpson got hurt. I think he played 22 snaps, 3 tackles, had a sack and a pass breakup. He's a long, rangy kind of stack backer. So he was, I was wondering how long it would take to get him on the field because he was a very difficult evaluation. But, he's playing there at Clemson. It's just crazy how many young guys they got to play because remember, Clemson doesn't use that transfer portal.
There you go. Week 11, true freshman impact right there. Chris Hummer's true freshman of the week. Take a guess, Harold Perkins. And, that one was a no-brainer. Drew, let's get to your winners and losers. Andrew Ivins does this column every week on Monday discussing the winners and losers of all college football when it comes to recruiting. You can find that article on 247sports.com. But, Drew, let's start with the Florida Gators. We said we're going to talk about them a little bit more. They got a big one. They are win this past weekend in Gainesville, 38-6. They handle South Carolina. South Carolina's kind of been an inconsistent team all season, but they're 6-4 right now. They've won their last 2. You kind of feel this surge in momentum starting to pick up on the recruiting trail. We talked about Jaden Rashada earlier in the show. We touched on Lucas Simmons, but there's a couple other guys from the state of Florida that Florida is still working on here.
Yeah, John Walker, the defensive lineman committed to UCF. You mentioned Jordan Hall. Jordan Hall, the linebacker that's committed to Michigan State. I believe he was inside the swamp. Mark Fletcher, Cedric Baxter. I mean, there's a long list. And to me, if we're looking for one coach, first-year head coach that seems to be in position to make some noise down the stretch, it's Billy Napier. And I think his staff has done an excellent job of kind of assembling and building out their staff. We've already seen them make some high-profile flips. Roderick Kearney coming over from Florida State. Marcus Stokes, he came over from Penn State. They're no stranger to this. Dejon Johnson, our favorite guy up there, Mustard, he was committed to Ohio State. It's just been impressive how Billy Napier has done this, and I think they got some more flips. They're going to keep that spatula handy here over the next few weeks. And the schedule is setting up pretty interesting at Vanderbilt this weekend. And then they got on Black Friday, rival Florida State. Can you imagine if they win those 2? I mean, Florida's going to have a ton of momentum.
Malik Bryant, top 247 linebacker as well. That one is well documented. Looks like Miami and Florida down the line. It was just like that not too long ago when he committed the first time. So we'll keep an eye on Florida. They are certainly one of those teams that we got circled right now, Drew. They're sitting at number 8. I think they can kind of make a move inside that top 5. They need some dominoes to fall, but right now they're surging. They're just kind of brick by brick Drew, let's get to the losers. It was a big opportunity for Texas this week as they hosted one of the teams in the college football playoff, I would say, picture right now. CFP, TCU sitting at number 4, and this was a big opportunity for them. They had College Game Day there. There was certainly a lot of excitement about this game being in Austin, a night game in Texas, and Steve Sarkisian are now 6-4 after losing this one to Sonny Dykes in the Horned Frogs, 17-10. Drew, your takeaway on Texas, and as we take a step back from 30,000 feet, it looks like Texas is recruiting at a very high clip, but maybe when you look at this a little bit, is anything about this trouble you at all?
Well, you're right, Cooper, in the sense that I think Texas is recruiting at a championship level. I mean, we just saw them get Colton Vasek. You know, they're trending for Anthony Hill, Jelani McDonald, one of my biggest freaks in the class. But a loss like this, where the offense, struggles, I think they went, 1 for 13 on third down. Quinn Ewers didn't have the best of nights. Steve Sarkisian's in his ear on the sidelines. To me, this is just kind of opening the door a little bit for someone to potentially make a run at Arch Manning. And I know that's going to be surprising to some. Oh, he's said all the right things. Why would he look around? But to me, the Mannings have been so calculated about this recruiting process. And by struggling on offense against TCU in a game where, people thought you were going to win. I mean, you were favored. I think that's just opening it up maybe for someone to have a conversation and look around. So I don't anticipate them losing Arch Manning, but I think that's certainly a conversation you need to have after a game like that. And after some of these games where it's been such a close efforts and they come up just a little bit short. I think either you texted it to me or editor Trey Scott texted it to me. They're like, hey, Texas just doesn't win a game that they're not supposed to win. And I've been kind of chewing on that because I think it's true.
I mean, what are we, 22 games through Steve Sarkisian's tenure at Texas? And what is the record here, 11-11? I think I had to do some quick math there. We might have to get that checked. But, Drew, I'm with you. I mean, and you said it. I texted it to you earlier in the week, but have they won a game they're not supposed to win when expectations said, hey, listen, these guys are the underdog coming into this situation? And I look at Steve Sarkisian at Texas, and every time we want them to take the next step, they can't take it. So I'm with you, Drew. Listen, no speculation here, but I think when it comes to Arch Manning, and you're talking about the Mannings being very calculated, this was kind of the question when he committed. And people are said, okay, is he strong in his commitment to Texas? Sure. At the time, during the offseason, Texas went 5-7 last year. Right now, they're 6-4. The next 2 weeks, I believe they have Kansas and Baylor. To me, they need to split both those games. They need to win both those games, but I wouldn't be surprised if they drop one of the next two. We'll certainly have a postseason shot right now as sitting there at 6-4. But to me, it is important how Texas and Steve Sarkisian finishes this season. And Drew, you talked about a lot of talent coming in to Austin last year and this year as well. Steve Sarkisian has done a really good job there. Now this team and this program just needs to see results on the field. It seems like it's been one step forward, 2 steps back. They need to find a little bit of consistency. And if you're Georgia, Andrew, if you're Alabama, even as crazy as that sounds with 2 quarterbacks in the boat, even if you're LSU, you keep picking up that phone and you keep chipping away and you keep making your presence known for Arch Manning. That's the number 1 player in the country. That's a guy that we are obviously very high on. You don't go away. And if you're Texas, they're no exception to what we've talked about earlier in the show when it comes to some of the best prospects in the country. Arch Manning going to be no different there. And I expect people to continue to knock on his door, especially if Texas continues to struggle down the stretch. So we'll keep an eye on that one. But Drew, back to the SEC, one of the winners, Auburn, right now interim head coach Cadillac Williams getting it done, and Texas A&M struggling. And for them, that seemed exactly what Auburn needed that this past weekend. A very exciting environment inside Jordan-Hare. Auburn gets the win 13-10. And Drew, we talked about this, but the timeliness of Auburn's hire to me feels more important maybe than any other vacancy out there, because I feel like if they get the right guy in there, they can strike while the iron's hot and still finish strong in this 2023 cycle.
For sure. And it was a cool environment and atmosphere inside Jordan-Hare Stadium. I mean, kind of like Williams is the interim coach. I think he had a quote out there. Auburn is where dreams are made. And, him and the rest of that interim staff, they pack the recruiting section with some blue chippers. And we keep talking about it, man. I don't know how Auburn keeps doing it, but they get some big time talent out to games, not even just for official visits, for unofficial visits. I mean, Ruben Bain, the top 247 pass rusher out of Miami Central, he was back on the plains. I think he tweeted out that he just TP'd his first tree, so he obviously rolled Toomer's corner. And I got them as a winner as well because they just opened that new $92 million football performance center. Cooper, I don't know if you've seen the videos of this thing, but man, that thing looks awesome. And I would assume Ruben Bain, Jelani Thurman, Tony Mitchell, all these guys got a chance to check that out. And I know we're in the NIL era where a lot of decisions aren't based on who's got the best, water fountain and the football, weight room. But still, man, that facility is top of the line. And I think that gives kids a reason to take a good hard look at Auburn.
Hey, that's only $7 more million in Jimbo Fisher's contract. That's a pretty good deal right there if you're Auburn. So you're feeling pretty good about that, Drew. One of the losers we have on here, and I think both me and you, we're trying to fill this out here, but Oregon, and I think more of a big-time opportunity for Dan Lanning, certainly as a team in the Pac-12, probably had the best chances going into this game against Washington for a CFP appearance. They lose this one at home in Alton to Washington, which stings enough. They lose it 37-34, and certainly some question marks after the game about Dan Lanning's decisions in game management. But Drew, we talked about it last week. They get 5-star DJ Hicks on campus, who's currently committed to Texas A&M, one of those programs we talked about. Caden Proctor, the number one offensive lineman in the country, was up there as well. But a big opportunity for the Ducks this weekend. They don't get it done. I still think they're in very good shape in terms of their outlook here over the next couple weeks. But on the national stage, I felt like this was a way for Dan Lanning to kind of put the exclamation point on what's been a really good season for them.
Yeah, it stings. Stings is the word I would use. You mentioned those two headliners. I think Dante Moore is another one that kind of falls into this category. So I don't think it's the end of the world. I don't think this class is going to blow up just with, one close game or coin flip could have gone the other direction. But you hit it on the nail on the head right there, Cooper. I mean, it was a missed opportunity for the Ducks, and it might be a while before they have another chance to take down a ranked opponent at home, if we're being honest. So just stings if you're an Oregon fan right now.
No doubt. So like I said, Andrew's Winners and Losers article every Monday does a fantastic job with that. You can find that at 247sports.com, along with a lot of other recruiting related content. The best in the business all live there at 247sports.com. Drew, we are 37 minutes in, so now it's officially time for Up Tempo as we get to segment 3. Producer Chris got to be shaking his head right now. But Drew, 2024 arms, and now we're starting to kind of turn the page as we are getting closer and closer to putting the finishing touches on the 2023 cycle. We mentioned signing day only a couple weeks away in December. True, but 2024, and why is it important right now where we got the 2024 rankings released to the top 247 getting a facelift here on Wednesday, and there's going to be a lot of shuffling when it comes to the quarterback races. And Drew, I know me, you, Gabriel Brooks, Chris Singletary, we did an extensive dive on this along with the others here at 24/7 Sports. And there are a lot of intriguing names here. But Drew, the one guy that I know you really like, that you are very anxious to talk about, that is DJ Lagway.
I am DJ Lagway, and what was it, me, you, and Gabe Brooks and Chris Singletary? We were all on the call, and it seemed like everyone had a different player comp for DJ Lagway. I tossed out Anthony Richardson, Chris Singletary. I think he tossed out KJ Jefferson. Here's the reality: DJ is a phenomenal athlete. He's actually got some SEC baseball offers, and he's one of those dominoes where I'm just interested to see where does he fall. And the knock on him this time last year is he wasn't the most polished of passers, but through his first 8 games, 67%, just over 2,000 yards, 24 touchdowns to go against 5 interceptions. He's also ran for 517 yards while averaging 10.3 yards per carry. I think this is a guy that can take a hit. I think he's a guy that can improvise in the pocket, and I think he's an improved passer. So to me, when we talk about height, weight, speed, and traits, he's got some of the best in the 2024 cycle. Obvious riser for me. Just visited Baylor, like I said earlier on the show. USC, Clemson, Florida are some of the other schools in there for DJ Lagway, but he's one to know if you don't know that name already.
Big physical, dynamic athlete, like you said, a traits-based prospect. But the development with him, Drew, has been his accuracy. He's up from 55% to 67% this season. Multi-sport background, we like that a lot. I really liked the KJ Jefferson comparison from our friend Chris Singletary. I think that really kind of fits him, but I think he's got more upside as a passer. So certainly a guy we're going to keep an eye on there. Drew, for me, the first name coming off the board, and I think you already know what it is, Elijah Brown from Mater Dei, and a guy that I love. I've talked on this show. He has a spotless record at Mater Dei, which is incredibly difficult to do. He is 8-0 versus Max Prep's top 25 ranked teams. So that schedule, along with the level of competition that they play out there in Southern California, is something that really kind of makes me lean into this prospect a lot more. Over 70% completion rate over his career. The last 2 seasons, pretty spotless through 10 games this season, over 2,200 yards, 25 touchdowns, 3 INTs. I just love his feel and command for the game in the pocket, a 3-level passer, very poised, love the way he plays. And Drew, there's been a lot of conversation about how high his upside is with his physical traits. I really think this kid is just scratching the surface of what he's going to become. And I really like this guy a lot. There's been a lot of conversation. Who's number 2? Is it Jaden Davis? Is it Julian Saint? Is it Elijah Brown? This is my pick right here. I love Elijah Brown. I love what he brings to the table. And overall, he's a winner doing it against the best competition. That's what we look for at every level. I think this kid's only getting better. And Drew, a lot of conversation there. I'm kind of interested to get your 2 cents on Elijah Brown.
No, I'm a fan. I mean, you mentioned that 8-0 record against Max Preps, top 25 teams. It all comes down to resume. I think he's kind of like the Dante Moore here of the 2023 cycle in terms of when you take a step back and look, hey, who do you want to hand the ball to on a Friday night, when you need a score and there's 2 minutes left? I think Elijah Brown might be that individual. Hopefully I'll get a chance to see him throw in person here at some point this spring, whether that be at a 7-on-7 tournament, Elite 11 regional or Elite 11 finals. But, you put on the cut-ups from different camps, you put on the tape. There's a lot to like about Elijah Brown.
Might be a trip for both of us to go make. But Drew, let's get into the wild card risers category. And there was a couple of these guys that we had circled, but you have been on this guy for a minute. And I got to give you a lot of credit because, a guy that had a multi-positional background. And to me, the more we've watched him play and settle into the quarterback position this year, he's continued to turn heads. That is Luke Cromanoke from Savannah Christian right there in Georgia, the Florida State commit. And Drew, you got to give a lot of credit to Mike Norvell and company for digging this one out early.
You do, because Luke Cromanoke last year, he played wide receiver, he played safety, and he was the backup quarterback to Holden Gerner, Elite 11 finalist that ended up signing with Auburn. And we didn't know how to really rank Luke Cromanoke. We'd seen him in a few camps, and that's why it became such a priority for me to make it out to one of his games early on in the junior season, and I did, and I came away super impressed. Now he's a plus athlete. He is 6'4", 185 pounds. Reminds me kind of body type wise of Ryan Tannehill, and I think he's got a similar play style. He can run the RPOs, but he can also air it out. He's got a live arm. He can put it on a rope. There was one throw he made this past Friday in the playoffs, or I retweeted it. I mean, it was a straight up dart. So I like this kid a lot. I think he's still progressing as a quarterback. Obviously, he hasn't got a ton of live reps. He's only started, a dozen games at the level. But no, great find for Mike Norvell. And I think they're going to have to hold on to him because Luke took a visit to Penn State. Florida has expressed interest, and kind of the buzz inside scouting circles right now is that even more schools are interested. So a lot to like about Luke Cromanoke, who should be moving here into that top 247.
Yeah, expect that to change. And, the irony, if a guy moves into the top 247, we'll see what happens there. We'll kind of follow the breadcrumbs. But a lot to like about Luke Kromenhoek. Drew, for me, I'm going out west. I'm going to California, and I'm going to Sacramento. I'm going to the high school football there. There's a lot of history. Jake Browning played his football there. But Austin Mack, if you don't know this name right now, write it down. This guy's 6'7" gunslinger out of Northern California. Drew, I called some people immediately after turning on his tape and saying, hey, am I crazy? Am I missing something here? Because as of a week ago, he only had offers from the Pac-12 conference. But Drew, a guy that certainly possesses a lot of desirable developmental upside in the arm. He moves well in the pocket. He can extend plays with his feet, and a guy that still has to add some polish to his game. And even that being said, you're like, hey, this guy's intriguing. He's only scratching the surface of what he's going to be. You look down at the stat sheet, well, pretty good. 10 games played, over 2,400 yards passing, 68% completion rate, 31 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. So that's a really good formula for a guy that still needs to develop and tighten some things up, not turning the ball over, Drew. I think this is going to be a household name in a hurry. And listen, I'm going to go out on a limb here, but you just do not see guys like this walking around very often. And I'm going to say, hey, at the end of the day, I think this guy is going to be in the conversation heavily for a top 32 spot.
Coop, I love his frame, man. I mean, what is he, 6'6"? Isn't he pushing 6'7"? I can't even remember what the exact measurement is on him. But, man, look at what the guys on Sundays who front offices and owners have invested money in. It's these big, long passers that can, not freak out in the pocket and hold on to the football. And that's what intrigues me the most about Austin Mack. Still a ways to go. And Coop, you're right. I'm interested to see how many schools are all of a sudden in his inbox after word gets out on him. Just visited Texas over the weekend, so we're already seeing more than just the Pac-12 try to get involved.
All right, Drew, your last one here. You brought him up last week, coming fresh off a visit to Gainesville in Florida, but that is Jake Merklinger, a guy that you really like.
Yeah, and that was his fourth trip down to Gainesville from Savannah. To me, he's someone that has also taken a major developmental step here as a junior touch passer, also a plus athlete that can run, like we're seeing it right here, him move in the pocket. He also can do some RPOs. And what I like about Jake, and I said it last week on the show, is just that multi-sport background, guy that also plays lacrosse. He can do a variety of different things. He's not just specialized in one thing. And Tennessee's in there, Florida's in there, a bunch of different schools as well for Jake Merklinger. I think he's kind of the next domino. A lot of guys are going to pivot to him maybe after that DJ Lagway decision. And what I think I can't wait to write about is Jake Merklinger against Luke Kromenhoek. I mean, these guys are from the same town in Savannah. Which one of them is going to finish in our rankings as the best one? It's almost like Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields-esque, it feels like. And it'd be crazy if it was Florida State, Luke Kromenhoek, and Jake Merklinger committed to Florida or something like that.
Savannah quarterback pipeline. Who would have thought? Jake Merklinger, a couple other guys coming out of there as well. But Drew, the last one for me, Nolan out of the state of Georgia in the Peach State as well. Drew, I really like this guy a lot. I got to see him over the summer workout in the offseason. Really impressed. A quick release, a guy that's a very good athlete in the pocket, quick twitch, can extend plays with his feet, gets the ball out quickly. But he is a gamer, Drew, and you kind of look at what he's done this season, over 2,700 passing yards through 10 games, 70% completion rate, 37 touchdowns, 3 INTs, 30 rushes, 137 yards, another 4 touchdowns on the ground. But I love his play style. I love his game. He plays within the game. I say that a lot, but I know I like guys that know what they do well and they don't overextend themselves. They also know their limitations. Drew, what he has going against him, there's only been one quarterback that's been left-handed that's been drafted in the last 7 drafts, believe it or not, and that is Tua Tagovailoa. He's having a pretty good season this year, so he's got a little bit of an uphill battle there. But Drew, I like this guy a lot. I expect a lot of teams, especially within that region, to come knocking on his door pretty soon.
I believe he's got one of the fastest releases according to one metric here in the 2024 cycle. So he's a lefty, but he can get that ball out. I know he recently visited Miami. He's also snuck out to Mississippi State. I think it'll be interesting to see whoever takes over at Auburn if they make Nolan a priority. But, man, he is having a monster year, playing with some great talent around him as well. Jelani Thurman, the tight end, headed to Ohio State. He's also got Robert Lockhart, small little slot receiver that's committed to Jackson State. So this is a guy that's got it done on Friday nights. You want to talk about resumes as well. Multi-year starter, could finish with a few different state title rings next to his name.
So that's the time that we have for the quarterbacks right now in this segment, in this show. We are 49 minutes in. We are running overtime. But, Drew, that's only 6 names. I mean, a couple guys that didn't even get named here. We didn't talk about Jaden Davis. We didn't talk about Julian Sayin. We didn't talk about C.J. Carr, who's committed to Notre Dame. Walter White, also another guy that we like a lot. Walker White, excuse me. But, Drew, an intriguing class. I don't think as talented at the top, but very, very deep.
Yeah, there's some depth in there, and I think there's a lot of different. It's like 31 flavors. I mean, what are you looking for? Desmond Williams up there. I mean, he's an electric athlete, one of the twitchiest guys I've seen with the ball in his hand in terms of he can spin out and take off with his wheels. Isaac Wilson, Zach Wilson's brother. C.J. Carr, another guy we like. It's going to be fun. Check out the rankings on Wednesday, and I still think we're only going to see more movement once we get more familiar with these guys and get into camp season.
You know you're struggling when you just accidentally dropped a Walter White there on accident. I might have to go watch Breaking Bad tonight. But, Drew, let's get to our 2-minute. We'll make this one quick. Arizona, Jedd Fisch, you might not look at it and say, hey, they made a ton of progress. I believe 4-6 right now, coming off a big upset win at UCLA against Chip Kelly and company. And, Drew, I can kind of see it. I wrote about it last year, the job that Jedd Fisch did. Recruiting some of the talent that he's brought in from the state of California, how he's kind of peppered that in with what he's done in the transfer portal. You really like what the Wildcats got cooking right now.
I did, because at one point in the offseason, someone made me write, we had to pick 2 transfers that we thought were going to exceed expectations. Well, my first one was Montrell Johnson, the running back at Florida, who's having a heck of a year. And my second one was Jaden Deloria, the quarterback that came to Arizona from Washington State. He came up big for them in that win on Saturday night. We also saw Jacob Coing make a ton of plays. He was a transfer out of UTEP. That was a big win for Arizona. And then Hunter Echols, former USC defensive end, he recovers a pair of fumbles. What I like about Fisch and what he is doing is he's also recruiting the high school level. Last year, they signed the nation's number 22 ranked recruiting class. Not as good right now, but I think a win in LA is going to go a long ways for them. And it seems like they kind of have the formula right now. You take some guys out of the portal, some veterans, but you also work the high school ranks, because some of those guys from that 2022 recruiting class were out there making plays as well. Mack, the wide receiver from Servite Academy, I think he had a touchdown there in the second half that helped them get that win. So, keep an eye on Arizona there in the Pac-12. I know they're only 4-6, but I think the trajectory is pointing up for that program.
It's a long-term rebuild for Arizona that they definitely had in mind. I think Jedd Fisch and company are way ahead of schedule. So like Andrew said, definitely a team to keep an eye on in the future. Drew, I'm going to go with the 2024 quarterbacks again, and I'm going to get back to this conversation because I think it's pretty fascinating. Outside of Dylan Raiola, who to me is really the one elite arm in this class who is different, and if you were to compare that to 2023, I think there's maybe 3 or 4 of those guys that you put in that category. To me, I think patience is a virtue here. And what I mean by that, I just talked about a couple names that are emerging. DJ Lagway is a name that we've known about for quite some time. But guys like Austin Mack and Walker White, Luke Cromano, Jake Merklinger, Nolan, Drew, these are a lot of guys that are really rising, not only in the rankings, but I expect to rise here in their recruitments as well as they start to gain more interest. And they have put that together on the field this season. And when you take a quarterback early, especially, there's always going to be that I would say you're going to be tempted to a certain level to get a quarterback early, obviously with the comfort that comes with that. But that being said, if you're patient in the process and you feel convicted in your process and the way that you're going about it, I mean, I think the fortune kind of favors the patient here, not the bold. but the patient, and you can be diligent, put yourself in a position to land one of these quarterbacks that maybe with a junior season was overlooked somewhat early in the process. So those names, Drew, that we talked about, I know those names really intrigue us. And what I mean by that, they might be ranked maybe in the middle of the pack right now, anywhere from 4 to 7, 4 to 8. But there are a handful of guys in there, Drew, that are capable of kind of finishing in that top 4 range. I don't know if you see it the same way, but I love that middle group of guys right there in the middle.
Lots of traits out there. No, I do agree with you. What you said, Walker White did you do it again or no?
Am I wrong here? Am I getting the name wrong? I think I said Walter White, Walker White. I'm all over the place, man. Long weekend. But Drew, before we wrap it up, final thoughts for today's show.
That's it, man. That's it. I wanted to ask you. You had your engagement party over the weekend, bud. Congrats. How did that go?
It was good, man. I'm still engaged. That's all I can ask for. So it was good. It was good. But guys, like I said, if you don't already, make sure you subscribe to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Make sure you leave a comment, leave a like on there as well. And before we leave, we want to make sure to let everybody know our condolences, our thoughts and prayers are with the University of Virginia and their football program today as well. For Andrew Ivins, I'm Cooper Petagna. We will be back on Wednesday, 5 o'clock Eastern. We'll see you then.